Well, I think it's a false distinction. In fact, it was U.S. President Woodrow Wilson who famously said, sanctions are, quote, something more tremendous than war. That was a quote that was cited in the study that your reporter mentioned that was published this May by the Washington, D.C.-based think tank, the Center for Economic and Policy Research, by the well-known economist Francisco Rodriguez. And his report shows that the imposition of U.S. sanctions on a country results in mortality rates increasing by 35% on average. His report also found that sanctions are 4 times deadlier than civil war for a country. So if you're looking simply at the death toll, in fact, you could argue that sanctions have been deadlier. And because you don't see the bombs being dropped, you don't see the dead bodies, people often think that they're less destructive. But in the case of Venezuela, a country that I have reported in and visited several times and seen the effect firsthand of sanctions, another report by the Center for Economic and Policy Research, this DC-based think tank by Jeffrey Sachs, found that the sanctions on Venezuela just in 2017 and 2018 led to 40,000 civilian deaths, tens of thousands of civilian deaths. And later, a top United Nations expert, a former special rapporteur, Alfred de Sayas, who's a legal expert, also estimated 100,000 Venezuelan civilians died because of the effects of sanctions. And it's easy to explain why. It's because it prevents countries from importing medicines that are critically needed and cancer treatments and such. We see the same effects in Syria, in Iran, in Zimbabwe. It also prevents the country from importing machine parts that are needed to repair public transportation and also medical equipment. I mean, there are so many effects that sanctions have on civilians that are not seen, and the United States often claims that it has humanitarian exceptions, but the reality is we can see constant reports from United Nations experts, like the top UN expert on sanctions, Alina Duhan, who has reported constantly that over-compliance by companies around the world leads to essentially sanctions being blockades of countries, and no one wants to do business with those countries, and that means it's very hard to import life-saving medicine and medical equipment.